In this video we're going to be taking a look at the Sigma 18-50mm f2.8, sticking it head to head against the Sony standard 16-50mm kit lens, seeing if it's worth the upgrade or can you make do with a kit lens. Let's jump straight into it. Let's start by looking at the size of each of the lenses. The Sigma 18-50mm with lens hood comes in at 12cm by 6cm. And the Sony 16-50 comes in at 4cm by 6.5cm. Both are very small zoom lenses. The price of these two lenses is quite a bit different, with the Sigma coming in at £429 UK, whilst the Sony comes in at £280. The weight of the Sony is only 160 grams, whilst the Sigma is 290 grams. At the moment it seems like the Sony lens is running away with this, but let's take a look at build quality, and this is where the Sony starts to fall down, with the Sigma feeling a lot more higher quality. The Sigma comes with a weather sealing gasket, keeping the water and dust away from your camera's internals, whilst the Sony kit lens doesn't. The Sigma zoom and focus rings feel smooth and precise. I feel to them like you're stirring honey. The Sony, on the other hand, the focus ring, which can double as its zoom, feels like a cheap pair of underpants with no elastic. The power zoom also has no feel to it. It lacks refinement and feels cheap. The Sony kit lens also comes with some very worrying rattle sounds when gently shook. It sounds like a plumber's tool bag. The zoom on the Sony kit lens, when extending or retracting, doesn't feel smooth at all, and it isn't very reassuring. The Sigma clearly has a better build quality, and with the camera in hand feels a lot nicer and more balanced of the two lenses. But let's take them out and see how they perform in the real world. Let's start by looking at the Sigma 18-50mm at its widest setting, which is 18mm. Exactly what you'd expect from an 18mm. So let's swap over now to the Sony 16-50mm and check out its widest setting at 16mm. So yep, that's definitely a 16mm. Let's compare it though against the 18mm of the Sigma. And back again. So that's the difference between the two at their widest settings. Right, let's try them at different focal lengths and see how they compare. Let's start again with the Sigma at 18mm, but this time we'll set the Sony at 18mm and compare the two images. And wow, that's quite a big difference, even though I'm using the readout on the back of the camera to make sure the Sony's at 18mm and the Sigma says it's at 18mm. There's quite a big difference between them there, as you can clearly see. Let's switch between them and have a look. So yeah, even though both lenses are set at 18mm, there's quite a big difference between them there. But let us zoom in a little bit and take a closer look. So this is the Sigma at 300% zoomed in and it looks pretty sharp. Let's switch over to the Sony and that looks pretty sharp also. Let's move over to the right hand side of the image though and take a look at some of the tree branches. This is the Sigma and that doesn't look too bad at all. Let's switch over to the Sony and yep, that's definitely a little bit softer there on the outside of the image. Let's move in though to 28mm on our focal length and check them out. Again, we'll start with the Sigma at 28mm and now let's swap over to the Sony at 28mm. Both pretty comparable, but let's zoom in and have a closer look. The Sigma zoomed in 300%, looks pretty sharp in the middle. Let's compare it to the Sony. And yeah, the Sony is just ever so slightly softer. Let's have a look at the outside edges. The Sigma don't look too bad, even though we're right up against the edge of the photo here. Let's compare it to the Sony. And at 28mm the Sony is getting even softer, so let's move up now to 35mm and see how that compares. Just before we check out the 35mm, I'd just like to say that the Sony lens gives us a focal readout on the back of the camera, With the Sigma, you don't get this. All you have to go off is the printed numbers on the lens. You get hard stops at 18mm and 50mm. If you're trying to marry up or match two lenses exactly at the same focal length, it can be pretty problematic because you're not sure 100% if you've got the correct focal length. Anyway, let's jump back to the video and compare them at approximately 35mm. This is the Sigma at approximately 35mm, and let's switch to the Sony. And oh wow, is that getting a little bit stretched there at the tower? Let's switch back again. And switch back again, and you can see that the Sony is just stretching the tower and pulling it around a little bit. Let's zoom in though and have a closer look. So the Sigma is really consistent at 300%, still maintaining sharpness. Let's switch to the Sony. And again, even though it's slightly softer in the center of the image, it's actually not too bad. Let's check out the sides though again. Again, the Sigma is doing quite decent to the middle left. Let's switch to the Sony. And no, it's starting to get really soft now on the Sony. Starting to really fall apart. Let's check both lenses out at 50mm. So this is the Sigma at 50mm. And let's check out the Sony at 50mm. And again, we're getting that distortion on the tower from the Sony. Let's switch back to the Sigma and have a look. And back to the Sony. Yeah, we're definitely getting some distortion from the Sony there. Let's have a closer look though. Again, the Sigma is pretty sharp at 300% zoom. Let's switch to the Sony. And now it's getting pretty soft in the center for the Sony. Let's take a look at the sides though. So the Sigma ain't doing too bad. Let's have a look at the Sony. And no, it's just completely obliterated and we're getting that distortion. Really soft and quite terrible distortion there. Okay, now we're filming on the Sony 16-50 with stabilization on the lens. So this is what you can expect with the stabilization on. Now it's worth noting that the Sony stabilization isn't great, but it's definitely a slight improvement having no stabilization at all. Let's switch over to the Sigma now and see how it compares with no stabilization. This is now the Sigma lens at 18mm with no stabilization at all. As you can see, the stabilization does make a little bit of difference, but not a whole great deal. And if you're using a tripod as your setup to do your vlogging, then both lenses work just as good. The minimum focus distance on these two lenses are the Sony is 25cm, with the Sigma coming in at 12.1cm. And here's a picture of the Sony's minimum distance, and here's one of the Sigma. As you can see, you can get a lot closer with the Sigma. Autofocus on both lenses is really fast and accurate. This is the Sony. Let's take a look at the Sigma. And as you can see, both are extremely fast and accurate. Now the Sigma at 18mm can step down to an aperture of f2.8, but what does that mean in terms of background blurriness? Let's take a look. This is the Sigma at f2.8, 18mm. Let's compare that to the Sony at 16mm that can only step down to 3.5. And that's the difference between 2.8 and 3.5. Now I'd just like to apologise for the model there. Maybe if you give this video a thumbs up and give it a comment, YouTube might recommend it more and I might be able to afford a half decent model in the future. Let's change both lenses to 50mm and check them out also. This is the Sigma at 50mm with its constant 2.8 aperture. Let's switch over to the Sony, which at 50mm goes to an aperture of 5.6. And the Sony don't look too bad at 5.6. Now obviously this depends on the distance your subject is away from its background, but in this particular test the Sony holds its own. Let's switch back to the Sigma again. And yes, whilst it definitely separates the subject a bit more, it's not miles ahead of the Sony at 50mm. Let's switch back to the Sony and check it out once more. So that's what you can expect from the bokeh of both of these lenses. You just got to work the Sony a little bit more, and at 50mm it gives surprisingly good results. Let's take a look at the low light performance of both these lenses and how their apertures makes a difference. This is a Sigma at 18mm, shutter speed is 1/50th, f2.8, ISO 1250. Let's switch over to the Sony. And here's the Sony. The lowest aperture we can go is f3.5, so we've had to raise the ISO from 1250 to 1600. So now we're zoomed in on the Sigma at 50mm, shutter speed is still 1/50th, f2.8, and our ISO is again 1250. Nothing's changed on the Sigma because of its constant aperture. And here's the Sony. Because it's got a variable aperture at 50mm, it's got an aperture of f5.6. So on the Sigma our ISO is 1250. On the Sony we have to raise that to ISO 4000. So we're starting to introduce noise into our image. Now if you're using a tripod you can get away with such low shutter speeds, but if you're using your camera handheld then you're going to bump up that shutter speed to make sure your image is sharp. Let's see how this affects our ISO and the noise in our images with both lenses. So here's an image at 50mm on the Sigma. We've got the shutter speed at 125th of a second, f2.8, ISO 8000. Let's have a look at the Sony. So here's the Sony at 50mm, same shutter speed of 125th of a second, f5.6, and look what's happened to our ISO. We've had to bump it up to 12,800. Let's have a closer look at the noise in these images. Here's the Sigma at ISO 8000, zoomed in 300%. And here's the Sony, and because we've had to raise that aperture, we've also had to raise the ISO, and thus we get a lot more noise with the Sony lens. So what is my conclusion to both these lenses? Let's start with the Sigma. It's simply superb, compact, sharp, with excellent build quality and extremely good imagery. Constant f2.8 aperture is wonderful and focus speed is on par with native Sony lenses. With a zoom range of 18 to 50, it's a good all-round lens. Great for street photography, weddings, portraits, landscapes and all types of video. I feel it's a lens that should have really come with the Sony ASPC cameras. When mounted to the camera it feels balanced and complements the Sony camera so well. At £429 I guess it's reasonably priced, but then again I'm someone who thinks all lenses are overpriced. Its only two downsides are it has no stabilisation and no focal readout length on the back of the camera. If it had these two things, then I couldn't fault it and would have gave it a perfect score of 10 out of 10. But because it's missing these features, I will mark it a solid 8 out of 10 and would highly recommend it. And it gets the walking in all weathers seal of approval. The Sony 16-50mm kit lens on the other hand, well, this isn't as good as the Sigma. It has a few downsides which I will go through. The build quality just isn't as good and doesn't feel as refined. As already shown, it rattles and doesn't fill you with confidence in its build quality. You definitely don't want to be dropping or banging this lens, that's for sure. Stabilisation, whilst it has it, isn't that great. Its balance in hand when mounted to the camera compared to the Sigma isn't as good. It's awkward to hold and operate due to its compact size. I know, I can't believe that would be a negative, but it is. Photos at the edges are super soft, but at the centre the image is quite decent. The side warping and distortion is terrible though at certain focal lengths and apertures, and the focus ring and power zoom feel cheap and clunky. If you're looking for a fast focusing, point and shoot photography and video lens, then yeah, this lens is fine. It does okay, as long as your subject is in the centre of the shot. So it's a good choice for vloggers who are looking for simplicity. But with so many downsides and its variable aperture, it falls short when looking for a good all-round multi-purpose lens. At the beginning of this video I told you that the Sony lens was £280, and it is on the Sony website, but it can be found for around half that price brand new on many other websites. But even at the £140 mark, I would still struggle to recommend it for anything other than vlogging or point and shoot photography. The Sony lens receives a score of 4 out of 10. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section if you own either of the lenses and if you agree or disagree with my scoring. But that's going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a like below, and if you want to see similar content like this, consider subscribing to the channel. I'll leave my previous video, the 18-50mm Sigma versus the Sigma Trio lenses, for you to watch here. Click it now if you're considering purchasing any of these Sigma lenses. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you very much for watching.